Welcome back to another riveting episode where we are rebuilding the engine from my 1989 Chrysler Conquest. If you remember from the last video where we left off, we got the bottom end buttoned up, everything taken care of there. So today's focus is going to be on getting the old piston rings off and putting the new set on and hopefully getting these pistons installed in the block. About 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'm just going to take a little bit of time out here today to get this stuff taken care of. So let's get to it. Okay, so first thing we're going to do here is get everything cleaned up. We're going to hit this with some brake clean and get everything fresh and ready for the new set of rings. Okay, so we'll grab our ring install tool and pull off all the old rings. Okay, so that was way more painful than it needed to be and took way longer than it should have. Part of the reason is, using junky tools. So, guys, if you can, use good tools if you can afford them. If not, you're going to be like me and have to fight through everything. So let's get these pistons cleaned up and then we'll talk about the pistons and the rings. Okay, so the pistons I'm using are Wiseco forged pistons, 20 thousandths overbore or 3.6070. They have a -6 cc dish, which bumps the compression ratio up to 8.0 to 1 from stock 7.0 to 1. These are floating pin, which means that the piston pin is not press fit into the rod. The rod itself has been bored and bushed. There was some irregularities that the machine shop found across all 4 of my rods, and they suggested that I bush them and use floating pins. Press fit is the way it was from the factory. Not sure there's any real advantage between one or the other, but I went with what my machine shop had recommended. I will say that getting these spring clips in here was an absolute nightmare, and I didn't feel the tips of my thumbs for about a week.
My fingers hurt.
Once you get the technique down on getting them in, finding which way they fit best gets a little easier, but it was still an absolute bear. So let's talk about the rings real quick. So these are Hastings rings. Now, if you remember in my last video, I talked about how I broke the second ring on one of the pistons and I ordered a new set. When I opened the packaging for the second ring in the new set, I realized it was different from the ones that I had already installed from the old set. So that's when I called Hastings to talk to them about this. And as you can see, both part numbers are exactly the same. The difference is this number running vertical here. This is a design number, and they use this number and confirm that it's basically just a design change and there's no difference in performance. So I'll just hang on to the rest of the old ones as spares just in case I ever need them. The new set has laser etched in the second ring indicating up, whereas the old set has a dot cast into the ring, which would also indicate up. If you have rings that don't have a dot or a laser etching in them, then it doesn't matter the orientation of the ring. So I'm going to give each one of these pistons a quick look over, make sure all of the ring gaps are clean. There's no crud built up on the lands or anything, which there should not be, but I'm going to double check anyway just to be sure, and then we'll get the new set of rings installed. So before we install the new rings on the pistons, we need to check ring end gap, and we do this by installing the ring into the cylinder bore and measuring with feeler gauges. The best way to do this is to take a second ring and install it on the piston, and then use this as your squaring tool. You want your ring squared in the bore so that you get the most accurate measurement. If the ring is crooked, it can open up that end gap and give you an improper measurement. If it's going to be much higher than stock boost, it's recommended that you open them ring gaps a little bit more. Higher boost, higher compression means more heat, which means a better chance of closing up those ring gaps faster. Okay, so first we want to wipe out the cylinder. So that there's nothing between the ring and the wall. So we'll start with our top ring, get it into the cylinder, and then use the piston to square it up. Okay, I'm on the verge of running out of heat out here.
Oh, boo-hoo! Let me play a sad song for you on the world's smallest violin.
So let's get these rings installed, and then I'm going to wrap it up for today. Now it's important to orient your wafer ring properly. So you see at your gap, you want those two ends pointing up towards the top of the piston. Okay, rings are all on, and pistons are ready to go into the block, but I am out of heat. So we'll end this here, grab some propane in the morning, and we'll go from there.
Tomorrow.
So it's 9 o'clock, Saturday morning. Headed to a couple wallet draining stores so I can see if I can find a wrinkle band ring compressor. I'm back. After about 947 stops and 11 million hours, finally got back here to pick up where I left off yesterday. Took like 3 stops to get propane. First place I usually get it filled at, somebody ended up overfilling their supply tank and they needed to vent the tank off. And I couldn't just take that anywhere because it might be about 9 years expired, allegedly. So I ended up having to go to Turkey Hill, where everything is 3 times the price and requires bloodletting of your first child. But anyway, we got heat. Something I want to talk about. You ever have those moments where you see something, but it doesn't register immediately, and you think about it later, and then suddenly it becomes obvious? That happened to me last night. So I went in the house and I was thinking about everything I was doing, and for some reason I remembered seeing one of the oil control rings, the rails, bent on the one piston when I was inspecting it. But for some reason it just didn't click in my mind at the time when I was looking at it. Sure enough, I came out last night and just wanted to double check and make sure that what I was seeing was actually correct. And sure enough, I did find one of the rails bent. It might be hard to see. I'll get a better angle of it then. But it does look like whichever piston that came off of when it was being installed, it caught the lip of the deck and it bent. I don't know if it was that the rings weren't compressed enough in the ring compressor, or if it just, I'm not sure. I don't know what caused that. There is a bevel on the tops of the cylinders after the block was decked. So I know it's not that the cylinder bore has a 90-degree lip on top. So I'm assuming it's either just that the rings weren't compressed enough, or the other thing I'm fearing a little bit, although I didn't see it on any other ones, is that the possibility of the expander ring being too long. So I got to take a look at that and just make sure that looks like it's supposed to, because on top of those expander rings, there's little tabs that the oil rails sit against, and once they're compressed, those little tabs, they hold outward pressure on those rails, so that when the piston is on its downstroke, it pulls the oil back down off the cylinder walls. If for some reason the expander ring is too long, then I'm gonna have to contact Hastings and see what they would recommend. Of course, it's a weekend, so they're not gonna be open. I don't think that's the case. It's just one of the things I want to double check and see what, if that's actually a problem. If it was just human error, which is more than likely what the case is. Here's a better look at that bent oil rail. Obviously, when I was inserting this piston, it got caught on the lip of the block and it bent. Now, I didn't feel anything out of the ordinary when this took place, because I never even expected to see this, but here it is. Again, another reason that having to go back a little bit and kind of start fresh was absolutely a blessing in disguise, because this would not have led to good things. So to further explain what I was getting at, these expander rings have these very small tabs on both sides. And these expander rings act as a spring, more or less, to keep a certain amount of tension against your thinner oil rails. And these rings will sit on top of here, but behind those little tabs. Something like that. One on the top, one on the bottom. And that keeps these 3 pieces essentially locked together as a set. And then the spring tension from this is what presses these out with the proper tension against your cylinder walls. So I'm looking at the oil control rings here. By all appearances, everything looks fine. It's installed correctly. All 3 move freely within the ring groove. The instructions say where the expander ring ends meet, that gap should face up towards the top of the piston. Doing some reading last night, a lot of people suggested that it doesn't matter if it faces top or bottom, but I'm going to go with what the instructions say. So that suggests to me that these expander rings are correct, that it was probably just human error on my part, either not compressing the rings enough or just not being meticulous enough to where one of those rails was either sticking out too far, may have been misaligned somehow. Something happened that it caught the top of the deck as it was being installed and it bent that rail.
Hey pal, you just blowing from Stupid Town?
It could have just been one of those things that it just wasn't enough to show face. So I think I'm going to roll with this and see how these install today. I'm going to be very careful, much more careful than I was before, which even then I was trying to be super careful. And we'll see if we can get these things installed. Okay, once you get your rings installed on your piston, before you put it into your engine block, you want to clock your rings. I just follow manufacturer instructions. A lot of people are going to tell you a lot of different things as far as how to clock them, but here's the thing. The second you turn that engine over, these rings are going to start spinning anyway. So where you clock them is they're only going to be in that position for a split second anyhow. As long as you don't clock them to where all the gaps are lined up, that's good enough. So hold your piston in front of you, facing as if you're facing the front of the engine. You'll take your top ring to 10 o'clock, your second ring it's at about 2 o'clock. And then for your oil rails, you want to align your rails so that each of your rail gaps are at least 1 inch to either side of your expander ring gap. My expander ring gap is here. Oil rail gap is here. The other oil rail gap is here. So as this piston sits, the rings are clocked properly. We can get it into the compressor and then we can get it installed into the engine. Now, before we get the pistons installed in the block, we need to get our bearings prepped and installed in the rods and the caps. These are a standard set of King bearings. All right, so let's get these cleaned up and ready to install. I don't know how well the camera will pick it up, but there's a very distinct difference between a clean bearing here and the packaged bearing here that has a thin film of oil on it to keep it from rusting during shipping and storage. All right, let's get the bearings installed in the caps first. These bearing halves are all the same, so it doesn't matter which one goes into the cap, which one goes into the rod. Line up the tang. Let's roll it in. Okay, bearings are installed in the rods and caps. Now we can move on to installing them into the block. Okay, so we're going to take some assembly lube and apply it to the number 2 and number 3 rod journals. And then we'll do the same on the rod bearing. Okay, let's get this flipped back over. Piston orientation. The top of the piston, there's an arrow pointing forward. The rod has a number 52 on it. That should also face to the front. You want to protect your crank journal from these ARP studs because it will nick the journal if you're not careful. Just take some 3/8 fuel line. They make caps for this stuff too, but I had some 3/8 fuel line laying around, so that's what I used. So in my infinite wisdom, I forgot to hit the record button when installing that first piston, but it's in there. It went in smoothly, tapped it in with the handle of my dead blow, and no issues getting it in there.
You sure about that?
So we'll move on to the next one. I have it soaking in oil currently. Just a quick oil bath. I'll get some assembly lube on the rod bearing, and we'll get that one installed next. Okay. Numbers 2 and 3 are in. So we'll roll this over and then we'll put the rod caps on those 2 pistons. So we have number 2 and 3 piston installed. You want to make sure that you grab number 2 and 3 cap. You do not want to mix these up. And you want to make sure you orient this properly on the rod. You want to be very careful when you're doing this that you don't rotate the crank at this point because it will roll your bearings out. I'll tap the cap on, put some downward force on the piston. And just tap it till it seats. Now when you're using ARP hardware, you need to use ARP assembly lube on the fastener threads and on the underside of the bolt head or nut face. And then you want to torque these to 35 foot-pound. You could probably get away with doing it in one stage, but I like to do at least 2 steps. So I'll go 20 and then 35. You bump it up to 35. Okay, so that rotates extremely smoothly, actually significantly better than when I had the pistons installed the first time. So clearly there were some issues. That bent scraper ring was probably one of the bigger ones.
You don't say!
So thankful that I had to step back and do double work. Sometimes it's worth it. All right, gonna wrap this video here. Got quite a bit accomplished today. Still have a little bit of stuff to do on the bottom end. I gotta do some cleaning, oil pickup tube, Oil pan needs to get cleaned out real good. I want to paint that or powder coat it, one or the other. So far, so good. Again, that rotates so much more smooth than it did the first time. Oh man, that really makes me, I don't know, man. I helped build one of these before many years ago. You know, a lot of this stuff still stuck with me, but some of it feels like it's the first time again too. But it just goes to show you got to be super, super careful, really meticulous about what you're doing. Use good tools if you can, and just take your time. You know, there's no need to rush any of this. Otherwise, you end up just having to go back and do double work. Sometimes, like in this case, it's worth it, but sometimes you might find yourself in a worse predicament than I could potentially have found myself in. So see where this goes. But anybody who's subscribed so far, anybody who's watched, I appreciate you taking the time. More to come. Not looking for perfection right now. I just want to stay consistent in what I'm putting out. If I'm doing anything wrong, or if you see anything in these videos, please call me out. You know, I'm here to learn too, and I would appreciate being given a chance to redeem myself and, you know, keep myself from sending this thing to the moon the first time I turn the key. So we'll see you soon. Catch you on the next one.